Senator Kennedy, you are a relic from Jim Crow, Louisiana, and you and Donald Trump are why this country is dying. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said it live on MSNBC under white studio lights in front of 700 cheering progressives packed into a midtown Manhattan audience like they had been invited to watch a coronation instead of a debate. The target was a 74-year-old country lawyer from Louisiana, sitting there with wire-rimmed glasses low on his nose and an old leather briefcase resting near his feet. The insult was designed to land like a public execution, clean, loud, and impossible to walk back from. Instead, it became the match that lit the fuse under 2 hours of receipts, silence, humiliation, and one of the coldest political dismantlings ever caught on live television. The MSNBC studio had been dressed for theater, not truth. AOC pins flashed under the lights, tax the rich shirts filled the rows, and the marquee above the stage read, "America at the Crossroads," as if the network had already decided the moral verdict before either guest opened a mouth. The table at center stage held two nameplates, Ocasio-Cortez and Kennedy, but the energy in the room belonged entirely to her when the show began. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked in at 5 minutes past 8 in a cream blazer, red lipstick, and chrome earrings that caught every camera angle like polished knives. She was 36 years old, polished, confident, fed by applause, and moving through the room like a fighter who knew the arena had already been bought and paid for. Senator John Neely Kennedy entered moments later with no glamour at all. Charcoal suit, measured steps, glasses sliding slightly down his nose, and that worn leather briefcase in his right hand. The kind of briefcase that looked less like a prop than a thing dragged through courthouses, airport lounges, committee rooms, and decades of ugly human behavior. A few people in the audience laughed when he sat down, because at first glance he looked like a tax accountant who had wandered onto the wrong soundstage. That laugh mattered because it told Kennedy exactly what the room thought it was about to witness. They believed he had come to be mocked, and by the end of the night, they would be standing for him. The host, Michael Donovan, took his seat between them and introduced the night as two voices, two visions, one America. The format gave each guest 4 minutes for an opening statement, but Ocasio-Cortez took 9 and treated every extra second like political territory seized from a weak opponent. She called Donald Trump the Mussolini of Mar-a-Lago, called the Republican Party a death cult wrapped in a flag, and turned toward Kennedy as if he were not a senator, but an artifact dragged out of a museum basement. She said his accent was a costume, his charm was a trick, and his politics came from the oldest racist playbook in America. The crowd loved it because the crowd had come hungry for punishment, and she was feeding them exactly what they had been trained to cheer. Then she widened the attack until it no longer belonged only to Kennedy. Conservative voters became scared old men, afraid of women, afraid of brown people, afraid of an America that did not look like 1955. Anyone who voted Republican in 2026, she said, carried guilt for fascism, guilt for children dying at the border, guilt for the suffering of Palestinians, guilt for every moral crime she could stack into one breathless indictment. Each accusation hit the audience like a drumbeat, and every cheer pushed her further from argument into performance. By the time she pointed at Kennedy without truly looking at him and said men like him and Donald Trump were the reason the country was dying, the room exploded. Phone cameras went up, signs lifted, and applause rolled across the studio for nearly a full minute. Kennedy did not move through any of it. He sat the way a man sits on a dock before sunrise, hands still, shoulders loose, eyes half covered by his glasses, listening not to the noise, but to the small thing inside the noise that everyone else had missed. His head tilted slightly, not in confusion, not in fear, but with the calm attention of a hunting dog catching a sound in the brush. That stillness did more damage than anger would have done, because it made the applause look oversized and temporary. When the noise finally broke apart, Michael Donovan turned toward him and asked for his response. Kennedy adjusted his glasses with one finger, and the Louisiana drawl came out thick, slow, and untouched by the studio's contempt. He told her she talked real pretty and compared her to a possum that kept stealing eggs from a henhouse. The audience laughed again, but this time they were laughing at the old man, not with him, and Ocasio-Cortez allowed herself a small smirk because she thought the trap had closed on him. Then Kennedy lifted the briefcase from the floor and placed it on the table, and the leather made a small, flat sound that cut through the room harder than a shout. He said that in 40-some years as a country lawyer, he had learned that when someone calls you a relic, the first thing to do is check what they are hiding in their own attic. The two latches clicked open, sharp and metallic, and the laughter died before it knew where to go. Kennedy did not rush, did not raise his voice, did not perform outrage for the camera because the briefcase was doing the theater for him. Before they got to Trump, he said they were going to talk about her. At that exact moment, Michael Donovan's smile faltered at one corner, small enough for a professional host to think he could hide it, but clear enough for the cameras to catch. The first folder Kennedy removed was blue, stiff cardstock with the seal of the House Committee on Ethics embossed in dull gold across the front. The corner was bent slightly, worn from travel, from handling, from being carried between Senate offices and television appearances during the weeks before the broadcast. Kennedy held it up with the delicacy of a prosecutor displaying a weapon, not waving it, not overselling it, simply letting the camera see the seal and forcing the room to understand that this was no comeback line. He identified it as the official findings of the House Committee on Ethics, released July 25, 2025, after a 3.5-year investigation involving 12,000 pages of documents. Then he began with the dress because everyone remembered the dress, and because symbols are always most dangerous when the bill finally arrives. The charity ball cost $30,000 a ticket. Ocasio-Cortez had attended wearing a big white dress with "Tax the Rich" written across the back in red letters, the kind of image that magazine covers turned into mythology before anyone asked who made it, who paid for it, or who waited to be paid. Kennedy asked whether she happened to know which congresswoman the report concerned, and for the first time that night, a laugh moved through the room that did not belong to her. Her smirk vanished, replaced by the frozen stillness of someone realizing that the floor beneath the performance had started to shift. She answered carefully, saying the investigation found no knowing or willful violation and that the matter was closed. Kennedy nodded as though she had helped him. He said he had read all 26 pages, every one of them, twice on the plane, and then he read the line that mattered. Her conduct was inconsistent with House rules, laws, and other standards of conduct. He repeated the meaning without needing to decorate it, because unanimous bipartisan findings do not need adjectives to become lethal. 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans had signed off on it, and that was the part no applause could wash away. When she opened her mouth, he lifted one finger from the folder, a gesture so small it barely counted as movement, yet final enough to close her mouth before a single defense could form. Then, the receipts came out one by one. The first was $250, the free Met Gala ticket for Riley Roberts, her fiancé, described in the report as an impermissible gift. Kennedy did not treat it like a small number because to working people, $250 is groceries, gas, a phone bill, the difference between making a week work and falling behind. The second was $2,733 for accessories, the earrings, handbag, and shoes she had underpaid for, an amount he tied directly to rent for a working family in the Bronx. The third receipt was the dress itself, and that was where the room began to understand that the slogan on her back had a shadow underneath it. Kennedy named the designer without rushing, because this was the part that had to be heard clearly. The dress had been designed by Brother Vellies, a black-owned, woman-led company founded by Aurora James, a business built around craftsmanship, labor, artisanship, and the kind of moral language Ocasio-Cortez usually claimed as her own territory. He explained that the dress took 250 hours of work, hand-stitched and hand-embroidered, with the red letters applied one at a time across the white fabric that had turned into a political icon. Then he moved from symbol to invoice, from photograph to paper trail, from applause to the ugly little mechanics of unpaid labor. The company sent invoices in October 2021, November, December, January 2022, February, and March, 6 months of asking to be paid for the garment that had made Ocasio-Cortez famous all over again. The studio changed in that moment. Not dramatically, not with one gasp that television producers could clip later, but through tiny human reactions spreading across the rows. Faces tightened, shoulders shifted, and a woman in the second row put her hand to her mouth because the contradiction was too clean to dismiss. A dress saying, "Tax the rich" had been made by a black-owned, woman-led small business, and the bill sat unpaid until the federal investigation began to breathe down the story's neck. Kennedy said it plainly, not as a flourish, but as a verdict. She paid them the way someone pays a bill she never meant to pay until somebody made her. Then came the fourth receipt, and it cut even deeper because it had no glamour around it. A hairstylist, a working Latina woman with children of her own, had to threaten a Department of Labor complaint to get paid for the work she did that night. The image was brutal because it stripped away the curated magazine cover and replaced it with a worker chasing payment from a politician who had built a career around workers being exploited by elites. Kennedy did not need to call her a hypocrite yet. The facts had already done the work. A woman wearing "Tax the Rich" had stood at the richest fashion event in America, while ordinary women had to chase her team for money. The fifth receipt was an internal email from September 11th, 2021, 2 days before the Met Gala. Kennedy held it differently, almost carefully, because this was not just about one invoice or one forgotten payment. The line said, "Met Gala attendees do not normally pay for this," and the sentence hung in the studio like smoke from a gun just fired. He explained what everyone already understood but did not want to say out loud. The event operated on the assumption that politicians and celebrities got the dresses, shoes, makeup, hair, and luxury treatment for free, then paid later only if someone forced the matter into daylight. The slogan on the dress was not rebellion against the system. It was decoration inside the system, worn by someone enjoying the very privilege she claimed to despise. Ocasio-Cortez tried to answer, and for the first time all night, the machinery jammed. Her mouth moved, but the word she had used for years as a shield did not come cleanly. She reached for sexist, the word that had ended hostile interviews, committee exchanges, and uncomfortable questions before they could become dangerous. Only broken sounds came out at first, fragments, half-syllables, a political reflex misfiring under the weight of documents. Kennedy waited with the calm cruelty of patience, then asked gently what she had said. She finally forced the accusation out, calling it a sexist attack on the only Latina woman in the room. Kennedy answered with a line that broke the first wall of the night. "Math ain't sexist. The black designer did not get paid for 6 months. That was not sexism. It was a fact. The Latina stylist had to threaten federal action. That was not sexism. It was a record. 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans signed the ethics report. That was not discrimination. It was bipartisan paper with signatures on it. The audience went still because the old weapon had failed in public. They had watched Ocasio-Cortez swing the label, and they had watched it bounce off the numbers without leaving a scratch. Kennedy closed the blue folder slowly, almost tenderly, as if he were closing a ledger at the end of a coroner's report. Then he told her the Met Gala was only the warm-up. The next receipt, he said, had cost real working people their jobs. The second folder was red, heavier in moral weight than it looked on the table. Across the front sat the seal of the New York State Department of Economic Development Impact Analysis, tied to Amazon HQ2 and the Long Island City project that died in 2019. Kennedy did not open it immediately because the pause itself forced the room to move from scandal to consequence. The dress had exposed hypocrisy, unpaid labor, and elite privilege wrapped in progressive branding. The Amazon folder was about wages that never arrived, careers that never began, and a neighborhood that had been turned into a political trophy. Kennedy said the study had been commissioned after the deal was killed by a Democratic governor inside her own state under her own party's administration. He asked whether she knew where Long Island City was, but the question carried the edge of a blade because everyone knew she did. It was in Queens, in or adjacent to her district, close enough for her constituents to look at the empty lots and remember what had been promised. Then the numbers came out. 25,000 jobs, many with an average salary of $150,000, alongside apprenticeship programs, tech pathways, logistics training, and opportunities for young people without four-year degrees. He let the figure breathe because 25,000 is not an abstraction when it belongs to a place where families measure survival in rent, subway fare, childcare, and whether a second job can be dropped before the body gives out. The project also meant $2.5 billion in development investment. Not slogans, not theory, not a policy paper glowing on a campaign website. It meant concrete, steel, welders, electrical crews, construction shifts, buildings going up, lunch counters filling, local workers clocking in, and money moving through a neighborhood that needed more than ideological applause. Another page showed $30 billion in projected new state revenue over the life of the project. Kennedy tied that number to schools, subway upgrades, public housing, hospitals, and the exact public goods Ocasio-Cortez claimed to fight for when cameras were on. Then he said that in February 2019, she killed it. She began to respond, but he had no interest in debating a chart when he had brought a witness. Kennedy turned toward the back of the studio and called for Marcus Jefferson to stand. The cameras swung, the audience turned, and a black man in his mid-30s rose from the third row from the back wearing a navy suit that looked bought for life's hardest occasions. His hands held a folded yellow legal pad paper, and those hands did not look like campaign hands or television hands. They looked like hands that had cleaned, carried, fixed, lifted, washed, and worked through exhaustion because nobody else was coming to rescue the family. Marcus Jefferson said he was born in Long Island City, went to Bryant High School, and came from a household where work was not theory, but inheritance. His father worked the docks at Hunts Point. His mother cleaned offices in Midtown Manhattan, and she rode the 7 train for 31 years to do it. In 2018, Marcus was 22 years old with 2 small children, working nights as a janitor and days as a dishwasher, sleeping 4 hours on a futon in the back of his mother's apartment. He made $23,000 a year, and his children slept on a mattress on the kitchen floor. That was the life waiting on the other side of Ocasio-Cortez's victory tweet. He had been accepted into the Amazon HQ2 Community Apprenticeship Program in November 2018. The offer meant $38,000 a year with health insurance from day one, training in warehouse logistics and inventory management, a pathway to $65,000 after 2 years, a possible $90,000 project management role after 5, tuition support at LaGuardia Community College, and on-site daycare for apprentice children. It was not a billionaire fantasy to Marcus Jefferson. It was the first adult door that had ever opened wide enough for him to walk through with his kids behind him. Then, February 14th, 2019 arrived, and the door slammed shut while the politician he had knocked doors for celebrated online. Marcus told the room he had voted for her twice. He had stood in the rain on East Tremont Avenue to cast that vote, and his mother, aunt, and whole building had believed she was one of them. They believed she knew what life looked like when there was no extra money, no family office, no soft landing, no brand deal, no camera crew turning struggle into mythology. When she posted "anything is possible," after the deal collapsed, Marcus read it on his phone in the back of a diner during his break. His hand shook because he understood exactly what the sentence meant. Anything was possible for her, but not for him, not for his kids, not for the other apprentices whose futures had just been burned for a headline. The apprenticeship died that day, and Marcus Jefferson made the room understand that policy does not die alone. 36 other young men and women from Long Island City lost the same chance he lost, and most of them never found another door like it. 3 of them were dead now, one from a heroin overdose after 2 years clean, one shot in front of his apartment building, and one by suicide in 2022. Marcus had gone to all 3 funerals, carrying the kind of knowledge no politician ever has to carry when a press release replaces a paycheck. His voice stayed steady, which made every word more punishing, because grief without theatrics is harder to dodge than grief dressed up for television. He said it took 5 years to climb back to where he would have been on day 1 of that Amazon job. 5 years of missed birthday parties, cheaper groceries, delayed school supplies, and telling his son no when the boy asked for a baseball glove. 5 years of children growing older while their father worked through a life that had been made harder by a political victory lap. Then Marcus delivered the sentence that cracked the room in half. The billionaires she said she stopped had gone somewhere else and were doing fine. Jeff Bezos was fine. Andy Jassy was fine. And the only people who lost were the people who looked like her, lived like her, and voted for her. When Marcus sat down, silence took over the studio with more force than applause ever had. Michael Donovan did not speak, because any word from him would have looked like interference. Ocasio-Cortez gripped the table, chest rising and falling, trying to find the old exit ramp, the familiar accusation, the label that could turn scrutiny into victimhood. Kennedy gave the numbers their final shape. 25,000 jobs, $150,000 a year, 10 years of wages, $37.5 billion denied to working people who needed opportunity more than ideology. Then he turned the knife without raising his voice and reminded her that after all that, she bought herself a Tesla. The word she wanted came apart again before it could become an argument. Racist, sexist, some familiar charge from the political emergency kit, but this time it broke into a half syllable and died in her mouth. Kennedy looked at her like a country preacher hearing a confession too late to save the sinner from the consequences. He told her numbers did not care what color she was, that math was just math, and Marcus Jefferson was not racist for having lost 5 years of his life. Those dead apprentices were not talking points. They were graves, and the empty promise of Long Island City had been buried with them. Then Kennedy closed the red folder and moved to the photograph. No folder came out this time, only a glossy 8x10 placed face down on the table and left there long enough for tension to gather around it. When he turned it over, Ocasio-Cortez reacted before the camera fully found her, with one small tightening at the mouth that betrayed recognition. The picture showed a white Tesla Model 3 crooked across a curb and 2 parking spaces with a congressional placard visible on the dashboard. It looked ridiculous at first, almost petty, until Kennedy began connecting every detail back to the principles she had sold to millions of people. He reminded her that in 2018, she had attacked Tesla subsidies on stage with Bernie Sanders, saying taxpayers gave money to Tesla and got no return on the investment. Then, in 2020, she bought a Tesla Model 3 long range, a car with a retail price around $59,000. The room made a low sound, not quite laughter, not shock either, more like the tired recognition people feel when a pattern finally admits itself. Kennedy followed the car, to May 2021 when it was photographed illegally parked outside a Whole Foods in Washington's Navy Yard neighborhood. Whole Foods, he said, owned by Amazon, the same Amazon she had attacked, the same Amazon connected to Jeff Bezos, the same Jeff Bezos she turned into a symbol of everything wrong with America. That was the moment the room laughed differently. Not the cruel laughter aimed at Kennedy in the beginning, not the partisan laughter that comes from people enjoying a rehearsed insult. This laughter escaped from the crowd in patches, embarrassed and involuntary, because the contradiction was too clean and too human. A politician who cursed billionaires drove the billionaire's car to the billionaire's grocery store and parked like the rules were made for someone else. Kennedy did not smile, because the laugh was not the point. The laugh was only the room admitting what the documents had already proven. Then he moved from the photograph to the union strike. Margaret Brennan had asked her in 2023 why she still owned a Tesla while the United Auto Workers were on strike, since Tesla made cars without union labor. Ocasio-Cortez had said she would trade it in, but years passed and the car remained. When asked again in 2025 whether she still owned it, she gave the answer Kennedy now held up for the room. For security reasons, she was not commenting. Kennedy turned that phrase over like an old coin, letting the audience hear how much it could cover when a public moralist no longer wanted public accountability. Security reasons for the Tesla. Security reasons for refusing to answer whether rhetoric against Elon Musk had helped fuel vandalism and attacks against Tesla owners. Security reasons after cars were torched, dealerships attacked, and federal prosecutors treated some incidents as domestic terrorism. The same woman who demanded transparency from everyone else had found a fog machine when the contradiction parked in her own driveway. Kennedy let the phrase hang there because nothing exposes privilege faster than a politician using privacy as a shield after building a career on other people's moral exposure. Then came the apartment, the Navy Yard building with luxury amenities, the kind of place ordinary workers might see in an ad and close immediately because the numbers were not written for them. 2 pools, climbing wall, racquetball courts, golf simulator, rooftop dog park, steam room, and a studio rent higher than what many families in her district paid for a 1-bedroom. Kennedy did not need to call it corruption because that would have been too easy and too imprecise. He called it champagne socialism, rage sold to people at the bottom by people living closer to the top than they would ever admit. The first real applause for Kennedy came from scattered rows in an MSNBC studio that had not been built to applaud him at all. He let it fade, then opened the third folder, green and thick, marked by an economic analysis of the Green New Deal. The energy in the room changed again because this was the issue she had been waiting for, the territory where she expected to regain balance. Kennedy asked for a plain English number, not a slogan, not a moral sermon, not a warning about the cost of inaction. She began with climate crisis language, the smooth, familiar phrasing that worked beautifully when nobody demanded arithmetic. Kennedy cut through it and asked again for the number. When she would not give one, he read it himself. The American Action Forum estimate placed the cost between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years, numbers so large they almost stopped sounding like money. Kennedy brought them back down to earth by comparing them to the entire American economy. Every car, every house, every loaf of bread, every paycheck, everything the country produced in years of work. Then he moved to the household level because that was where ideology stops being abstract and starts arriving as a bill. One estimate placed the first-year household energy cost at $74,287, more than the median household income in her own district. He took out the calculator like a prop from another century, a beat-up pocket machine with buttons that clicked louder than any campaign slogan in the room. The math was merciless. $68,000 in median income minus $74,000 in first-year energy cost left a family $6,000 in the hole just to keep the lights on. That meant heat in February, groceries after rent, a ride to the emergency room, a mother deciding which bill could wait without causing disaster. After year one, Kennedy said, the cost still remained at $47,755 per household per year, a permanent pressure placed on families already living one mistake away from collapse. The audience sat with the number because no chant could make it smaller. Then he named the jobs: pipeline welders in Beaumont, coal miners in Mingo County, truckers out of Joplin, refinery workers in Lake Charles, auto workers in Lordstown, gas crews in Pennsylvania, drillers in North Dakota, roughnecks in Midland, shipbuilders in Pascagoula. These were not villains in Kennedy's telling. They were fathers, mothers, sons, uncles, people with alarm clocks set before dawn and bodies worn down by labor. He said the policy would kill those jobs on purpose, not by accident, not as collateral damage, but as mission. That accusation landed because it turned the Green New Deal from a dream on a poster into a pink slip written in advance. Then Kennedy reached for the worn Washington Post printout, the one that looked like it had lived in a desk drawer long enough to become part of the furniture. He read the quote from her former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarty, the line about the Green New Deal not originally being a climate thing at all, but a plan to change the entire economy. That sentence did what the cost estimates could not do by themselves. It took the moral packaging off the bill and showed the machinery underneath, the intent to rebuild the country around planners, bureaucrats, and activists who believed ordinary workers needed to be managed from above. Kennedy folded the paper and made the room sit with the difference between saving the planet and redesigning the lives of people who never asked to be experimented on. Michael Donovan finally stepped in, but even he sounded careful now. He asked Ocasio-Cortez whether she had a counter-estimate, and the question landed like a referee realizing the fight had gone too far to pretend both sides were still standing. She opened her mouth and reached again for the old language, but no number came out. Only the broken start of an accusation, one more half-formed attempt to call the attack racist before the word collapsed under the weight of arithmetic. Kennedy did not interrupt, because the silence had become more useful than anything he could say. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 15, and every camera in the studio understood what it was filming. The most famous progressive voice in America had no answer to the cost of her own signature vision. The green folder closed, and Kennedy told her that back in Louisiana, when somebody could not argue back, people knew they had no hand left to play. Then he set the folder beside the others, blue, red, and green, 3 colors of the same indictment. After the money, he said, they were going to talk about something heavier. The 4th folder was black. It carried a different feeling before he even opened it because Kennedy's hand rested on it longer than it had rested on the others. The seal read, United States Senate Judiciary Committee Oversight, but the real weight came from the first word he spoke after the pause, Auschwitz. The studio went still in a way that had nothing to do with partisan embarrassment anymore. Kennedy named Dachau, Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, Sobibor, Majdanek, and Chelmno, slowly enough that each name arrived like a bell struck in a cemetery. He spoke of concentration camps and death factories, 6 million Jews murdered, 1.1 million at Auschwitz alone, along with Roma, Sinti, disabled children, Polish priests, Soviet prisoners, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and political dissidents. He did not use the Holocaust as a flourish. He laid it out as organized evil, signed, scheduled, and transported by train. Then he turned to Ocasio-Cortez and reminded her that in June 2019, she had said the United States was running concentration camps on the southern border. She said she stood by that statement, but Kennedy was already opening the black folder. He read the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's response, the part that unequivocally rejected analogies between the Holocaust and contemporary events. The word unequivocally mattered because institutions built to honor the dead do not reach for that kind of language casually. Then he read the Auschwitz Memorial Museum's response, the actual museum at the actual death camp, reminding the public that concentration camps were sites of systematic state murder, not metaphors for political messaging. The room had no appetite left for cheering because the subject did not allow it. Kennedy had moved the debate from hypocrisy to memory, and memory does not negotiate with branding. Then came Senate Bill 811, the $4.5 billion emergency humanitarian funding bill for migrant children at the border. Food, medical care, soap, beds, clothes, and basic relief for the children Ocasio-Cortez had said were trapped in concentration camps. Kennedy asked the obvious question without needing to phrase it as a question at all. She voted no. When she tried to defend the vote by saying it funded agencies committing abuses, he brought the point back to its simplest form. The bill was for food for children, and she voted no on food for children. The silence changed again, darker and more personal. Earlier, the audience had watched a politician cornered over invoices, jobs, cars, and trillion-dollar policy costs. Now they were being forced to look at children, not as hashtags, not as symbols, but as hungry bodies at the border. Kennedy made it cruelly plain that many of those children were Latino, brown, and from the very communities Ocasio-Cortez claimed to defend with unmatched moral authority. The accusation no longer sounded like politics. It sounded like abandonment dressed in righteous language. But Kennedy was not finished, because the black folder had one more chamber. He pulled the transcript from the April 1st, 2026 Democratic Socialists of America Forum in New York City, where Ocasio-Cortez had said she had not once voted to authorize funding to Israel and never would. Then he read the follow-up question about whether that included defensive capabilities like Iron Dome. Her answer had been yes. Kennedy let that answer hang in the air because two letters had rarely sounded so heavy. He explained that Iron Dome does not invade, occupy, shoot first, or target civilians. It intercepts rockets before they strike apartment buildings, hospitals, schools, synagogues, pizza shops, and children trying to live through another ordinary day. He cited the October 7th, 2023 rocket barrage and the system's role in stopping rockets headed toward populated areas. Then he framed her commitment in the harshest possible language. She had promised in a private room where she thought the public was not listening to oppose the shield that keeps rockets from landing on children. The audience sat in a silence that felt almost sacred because nobody wanted to be the first person to breathe too loudly. Kennedy turned toward the seventh row and called Rosario Mendez to stand. She rose in a navy dress and cardigan, a gold cross at her throat, looking less like a political witness than a woman who had carried too much history to let someone else misuse it. Her voice was steady as she described being born in Havana, her parents' dissident lives, her father's arrests, his prison cell, the beatings, and the body weight he lost before coming home. She told the room about escaping Castro's Cuba by boat in 1982, packed with 31 people on a vessel built for 8. 3 did not survive, including a baby named Esperanza, whose mother held her body for the final 6 hours of the crossing without making a sound. Rosario described legal asylum, 11 years of paperwork, interviews, office visits, background checks, and waiting for citizenship the right way. Then she identified herself in words no campaign consultant could improve: brown, Latina, immigrant, Catholic, American, wife, mother, nurse, voter, person, not a demographic. She had voted across party lines, supported different candidates over the years, and refused to be reduced to a category on somebody else's spreadsheet. For 7 years, she said, she had watched Ocasio-Cortez use her face to push policies that hurt her children's country. She had watched legal immigrants smeared as bigots for asking others to follow the same law they had followed, and she had watched real prisons in Cuba turned into metaphors by people who had never lived under them. Then Rosario said what the entire night had been building toward. Ocasio-Cortez did not speak for legal Latina immigrants, people of faith, working women, refugees from real oppression, or families who knew the difference between slogans and survival. She spoke for herself and for the people who paid for her dress. When Rosario sat down, the studio fell into the deepest silence of the night. Ocasio-Cortez looked down at the table, hands flat, knuckles pale, lips moving without language, because every familiar label had finally run out of oxygen. Kennedy waited, and this time there was no pleasure in his patience. He closed the black folder softly and told her he thought they were done. Then he stood for the first time all night, buttoned his charcoal jacket, lifted the briefcase, and walked around the table with the slow balance of an older man whose work was already finished. He said he had come because the network invited him, maybe because they thought the country lawyer would be easy to humiliate. Then he reminded the room that he had been underestimated before, from Vanderbilt to UVA law to Oxford to 40-some years representing people hurt by big companies. He accepted the word relic and turned it into a weapon. Real Americans, he said, did not look like Met Gala gowns, $60,000 Teslas, Whole Foods parking spots, luxury apartments, or designer slogans with unpaid invoices behind them. They looked like Marcus Jefferson, Rosario Mendez, welders in Beaumont, truckers in Joplin, nurses in Newark, and apprenticeship kids in Long Island City who never got their chance. He spoke of his father, a fertilizer salesman from Mississippi, who drove hundreds of miles in an old green Buick that smelled like tobacco and diesel, working until he died behind the wheel in 1991. Then he said that when Ocasio-Cortez mocked conservative voters as scared old men, she had mocked people like him, his parents, his uncle, and every immigrant who came from real socialism and knew exactly what it was. Kennedy held up the briefcase and named the 5 rounds again. The Met Gala, where a black designer waited 6 months to be paid. Amazon HQ2, where 25,000 jobs died for a tweet. The Tesla, the Whole Foods, the Green New Deal, the border funding, and Iron Dome. Nothing he brought to the stage had come from rumor. It came from her own life, her own votes, her own words, her own records, and that was why there was nothing left to answer. He told her he took no pleasure in watching a young woman destroy her life through vanity and ideology. She had once known what it meant to work, to count tips, to stand on the edge of ordinary struggle and speak from it honestly. Somewhere along the line, he said, sounding right had replaced being right, and anger had become easier than answers. Then he sat, folded his hands, and told Michael Donovan that he thought they were done. The applause began in the back, spread row by row, and within seconds the MSNBC audience that had come to cheer her humiliation of him was standing for the country lawyer from Louisiana. Ocasio-Cortez stayed seated with her head down. Her cream blazer was rumpled, her lipstick smudged slightly at the corner, and her earrings caught the studio lights one last time while the room moved around her. She did not yell, cry, storm out, or try to reclaim the stage. She simply sat there as the applause lasted 2 minutes and 47 seconds, long enough for the cameras to capture every inch of the collapse. By morning, the clips were everywhere, not because of a resignation, an indictment, or a federal raid, but because receipts had done what rhetoric could not undo.